Life as Ceremony shares personal stories, interviews with inspirational souls, and practical wisdom to help you reconnect with yourself and spirituality. Welcome back to another episode of Life as Ceremony. Today we have Michael Ventura joining us. He is a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur. He's the former CEO of Sub Rosa, a strategy and design firm that has worked with some of the world's most influential companies, such as Nike, Google, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, the United Nations, and the Obama administration. He's the author of a book called Applied Empathy, and he is currently writing his second book. Michael is also a practitioner of folk medicine traditions, where he works with people one-on-one and group settings through his faculty appointment at the Esalen Institute. Thank you for joining us today, Michael.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And he flew in from Connecticut today. Like, he has already had a busy day. So I'm so grateful that, yeah, you've made the time, you made your flight on time and you made it here. So thanks for being with us.
Yeah, happy to do it. This is my favorite kind of thing to do is just drop in and have a nice human to human chat. So let's do it, my friend.
Okay, ready for a few this or that questions and rapid fire?
Sure.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Both.
Okay. Slurpees or slushies?
Ooh, good question. I like a Slurpee.
Nice, right on. Michael joined me with a Slurpee this morning, so I had to throw that one in there.
Yeah,
Dogs or cats?
dogs.
Yeah, and you're part of a really cool brand for,
Yeah, I'm a co-founder in a business called Kismet, which is a pet, like premium pet food and treats. And it's been fun. We're a little over a year old and yeah, get to talk about dogs and play with dogs often.
amazing. Solitude or collaboration?
I prefer solitude.
Solitude, nice. Intuition or strategy?
Intuition.
Intuition. Always having to sing instead of talk, or always having to dance instead of walk?
Ooh. That's a hard one. I'll say dance.
Dance, right on. Where is the most impactful place you've ever traveled to?
Hmm. The places that I thought I wouldn't go back to.
Ooh. Any that you want to name?
Childhood home, good example.
Nice one.
Like you kind of like I drove past it not that long ago and spent 20 years of my family's life there and now they sold it, my parents retired, they moved somewhere else, and drove past this place that wasn't ours anymore and definitely had some
Mm.
stuff it stirs up.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you share with us where you were born and raised?
Yeah, I was born and raised in New Jersey, about 20 minutes from Manhattan, so pretty close to a major metropolis, but like with with a backyard and a swimming pool. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, I suppose.
Right on. Last one for you. Do you have a favorite quote or words to live by?
So, friend of mine, his father said something when I was getting started in my work career, where he said, if you don't get into trouble, you'll never learn how to get out of it. And I always thought that was a nice encouragement for appropriately calibrated risk taking.
Nice. Absolutely. And, I think of creativity or being the essence of solving a problem. If you don't, yeah, get yourself into problems, how are you going to learn to get out of them?
Right, exactly.
There you go. Actually, I'm going to add to this list. These are your words, but I've heard you say them twice. You shared them with me in our first conversation, and I heard you say them somewhere recently, and it was that all ships rise in high tides.
Mm,
And I've just heard you say that a couple times. So when I was asking you this question, I was like, I wonder if he was going to share
mm.
that. And if not, I just wanted to add it for listeners because that's when you opened my eyes to, my ears to, that I love so much.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's true when you're doing this work in the public sphere, whether it's like what you're doing here with me right now, or as an author, or as a entrepreneur, or whatever it is. You have to be mindful that your actions are either going to help pick everyone else up with you, or can detract, right? And so it's you're not alone on the water.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. What brought you to where you are today, like personally or professionally, wherever you want to start your story and whatever you want to share with us today?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, grew up in New Jersey and was the son of, am the son of a entrepreneur. My father's a entrepreneur, and my mother is an educator, and kind of ended up basically being a combination of the two because a lot of my work now lives at the intersection of business and education and writing and public speaking and things like that. And as I sort of started my career at a relatively young age, at 24, I started my first company. And it wasn't because I was so sure I knew what I was doing. It was actually because I was just curious about trying to build something and, learn on the battlefield, as they say. And kept just kind of failing forward, and picking yourself back up and figuring out what to do next. And that didn't work. Let's try this instead, so on and so forth. And I've built a career as a builder, and as a seeker, as someone who's always been curious, always wanted to learn new things, new skills, new ways of being, pushing myself to grow, sometimes really uncomfortably, sometimes with a lot of mistakes along the way. I have a good friend who says, scars with good stories, which I think is what a lot of us accumulate over time. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if I boil down where I am today, it is post several businesses being built and some being exited and some being folded. Uh, I'm still curious. I'm still desirous of wanting to help other people and their journeys get where they need them to be. And still trying to figure out what I want along the
Hmm.
way.
Totally. Yeah. Can we go back to maybe around, you said 24 years old was when you started your first company?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us more about what that was like, that journey, and what inspired you to
Mhm.
start your own company at 24 years old?
So, getting fired is what inspired me to start my own company. So when I graduated, I started working at a marketing company and was let go about a year into working there. And I had a buddy who was working at an investment bank and he was miserable. And so we were both sort of like, well, hey, if both of us are thinking about what we're going to do next, would we consider trying to launch something? And this was at a time, this was 2004. So this is at a time when the internet was still, for corporations, a very confusing place. They were talking about things that don't even exist anymore. And for some of your listeners, they won't even know what I'm talking about. But like they were talking about what's Finster and what MySpace and like what are these like social platforms that no longer exist. And we had opinions about them because we kind of grew up natively with all of these platforms around us. And um, we built a digital agency. We were building websites. We were advising on social strategy, not because we were better at doing it than other people necessarily, but because we were native to it and we understood it from a user standpoint and from a zeitgeist and sort of cultural perspective. And so when they would ask us, like, is this like, should we be on Pinterest? We'd have an opinion. Our opinion wasn't the only opinion, but it was valued because of our experience. So yeah, I think that's kind of how it all got started. And then that grew from a digital company into more of a full service creative agency. And then in the 2008 financial crisis, when the world got flipped upside down again, um, some of my partners wanted to move on and do something else. I wanted to stay, but I knew we had to restructure in order to keep the business growing and doing ultimately what we wanted it to do. And so, over the course of about a year to 18 months, rebooted the whole business as more of a strategy consultancy, which then became Sub Rosa. Um, we still hung on to the design and the sort of executional side of the world, but at a much smaller percentage of the total business, where we kind of moved a bit more into the consultative side, which was where we could affect change more meaningfully.
Mhm. I'm so curious. Do you remember the moment where I think, what was the first largest company that contacted you?
PepsiCo.
PepsiCo. And do you remember like that moment in time, like where you were or how old you were, or even like how you felt about it at that time?
Yeah, we were. So we had met their then chief marketing officer at an event. It was my business partner and I. And we were 25 years old, and he was just an interesting, curious fella, and he thought we were saying things that he needed his team to hear. So he invited us up to talk with the brand, and we came in, and I remember we like we wore suits because we were like, oh, that's probably what you should do. And and we gave a good presentation and we left and they called us back and we went up for, another meeting. And over time, I think what we learned in the suits, I bring up the suits because it's a funny example of something that I think people sometimes overlook. After like 5 or 6 meetings, we looked at each other and we said, they don't want us to be like them. So why are we dressing like them? They're
Mm,
bringing us in because they want us to be like us. Let's never forget, like, we're being hired for who we are, not for who we think we can present ourselves as.
mm,
And that was always an important thing to me with our team as it grew and as we got more sophisticated. Um, don't change who you are to fit into someone else's world, right? The reason you get invited into their world is because they're stuck in their world and they need someone outside perspective sometimes to help them think differently.
totally. Yeah, actually, can I share like a cute little story with you on
Yeah,
that?
please.
I'm so glad you brought up the suits because just a few weeks ago in May, a friend of mine, we were running a retreat for YPO, Young
Hmm.
Presidents Organization, a group of 8 people. And, I showed up in my big hat and my jean jacket. And I remember, and my friends in her jean jacket and her big white skirt. And, we probably looked like we were going to Coachella. And we knew that we weren't going to be dressed like who we were meeting there. And
Right.
I remember, yeah, like feeling, those were some of the thoughts running through my head of like, oh, is it okay that I'm wearing this or that I am dressed like this because of who, we were going to meet. And so, yeah, I just love that story of the suits. And I think it's really important that, you're being brought in because you're different, because you have something different to say, because of who you are, and that we don't need to, change how we dress or how we think or what we say for the people, especially when we're being invited into their space. They're probably curious about the wisdom that we have to share that's different from their own.
That's right. Absolutely. And I'm glad you shared that because yeah, it is. And it has always proven to be true since then for me as well, where no matter what the audience is, and I'm sure we'll get into this as we go, but my career has taken and my life has taken a lot of different paths, some of them non-traditional
Hmm.
and non-corporate. And I used to hide the non-corporate stuff from the corporate stuff and vice versa. And then I realized, no, that's like actually the opposite of the point is that like they both belong together.
Mm, I love that. Like life as ceremony is about bridging the physical and the spiritual so that we can be in connection, unity, wholeness. And I think that's so true about what you're saying, the corporate world or the suits and this. It's that there is not this divide or disconnection, but how do we bridge it or bring it all together and allow it all to coexist?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, while we're on, entrepreneurship or corporate and even just thinking back to 24, 25-year-old Michael, I'm so curious what he believed to be true about leadership versus what you now believe today about leadership. And it might be the same, it
Mhm.
might be different.
Well, there's some parts that are and some parts that aren't, because I think that's probably true for most, right? So I think one of the things that I really saw as important then and remains an important part is the responsibility that leadership comes with to show up appropriately for the people who are showing up for you. That means being present. That means doing your part to participate and prepare and make a meaningful conversation or a meaningful piece of work come to bear. There were times where I would walk in and I would allow that responsibility to be too overwhelming. I would be stressed. I would be riddled with anxiety. Sometimes looking around at 50 people in an office that I felt if I make a mistake, these people can't pay their rent this month, or these
Mm,
people are going to have to like have a hard time, going on that vacation with their kids that they were planning on. And there's a degree on that sort of dimmer switch that you want to set your responsibility at, that is motivating, but not so much that it's debilitating. And everyone's dimmer has a different spot. So you've
mm,
got to kind of learn how to do that. On the side that I think I grew out of, I definitely grew out of, there's this tendency, I think, with a lot of entrepreneurs to, especially in services businesses, mistake headcount for success. Oh, I've got 200 people working for me. Could you make the same business function successfully with 120? Would that be worse or would that be better? It would be better, of course, right? You'd be able to be more profitable, you'd be able to be more efficient. So like this like tendency that has existed for a lot of people to sort of land grab people and say like, oh, look at the size of this company I've built, was a thing that early on I thought that was what defined success. Oh, we're, how many people work here, right? Especially when it's a services business where you're billing hourly, right? So, more people mean more hours, but that doesn't always mean the right thing for the right bit for every business.
mm. Absolutely. What does success mean to you today?
Freedom.
Freedom. Mm. What does freedom look like or feel
Hmm.
like for you?
Yeah, I think it's choice. I think it's the ability to work on things that I like to work on, the ability to work with the right people, and to be able to choose the folks that I spend my time with a little more carefully. Um, it means creating the time and the space for exploration and curiosity, as opposed to like fitting that in when you're, you know, got that free 20 minutes in between one thing and another thing, right? Like actually giving yourself the permission
Mhm.
to be curious as part of your practice. Um, I also think it's for me, not having any head count now, the opposite of what we were just saying, since 2020, I've no longer run Sub Rosa, and um, that's really nice. I still have meetings, I still have things I got to show up to, but I don't go to bed wondering about 50 people's salary anymore.
Mhm. Yeah. I feel the lightness in that when you say that, especially that last sentence, going to sleep without that weight on you, because it sounds like you cared. You're a leader who really cares about people, and yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And your next book that I believe you're currently writing is coming
Hmm.
out 2026.
Yeah, it'll be out April of 2026.
Amazing. Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's more about purpose. Is that right?
Yeah, so the general premise of this book is that, we as humans have been thinking about and building lives on this idea of having a purpose and having a North Star for a long time. And I think anyone who's done work on themselves and started to think about their purpose has looked at phrases like finding your North Star or finding your why or done an Enneagram or done any an Ikigai, done, any sort of self-knowledge pursuit is going to lead you into some place. And the North Star idea is a little challenging because it suffers from what I refer to as a Goldilocks problem. Sometimes it's too narrow and easily accomplishable, so it's not inspiring. It doesn't feel like a purpose. And sometimes, often, what ends up happening is people come up with a purpose that's big and ambitious and almost too abstract to get your arms around. And so you don't know what to do about it, and it's vague. And so we spend our time trying to find this like Goldilocks state in the middle that doesn't really exist because this one ring to rule them all kind of approach really doesn't make as much sense. And so taking a systems thinking approach to life and to the way we tackle problems, can we move the metaphor from North Star to constellation thinking? and start to think about what are our lives as constellations, as various points of light. And when we connect those various points of light together, some of them being personal, some of them being professional, some of them being intimate, some of them being public, whatever it is, um, what is the myth that starts to emerge? Much like when you connect all the dots and then Sagittarius is in the sky and there's a whole story behind it. What is the myth of me? What's the thing we're creating? What's the story that is driving my purpose forward?
Hmm. How would you describe your purpose or your constellations?
Mm. So it's an interesting moment in my life to be asking this. It's a bit in flux because as I go through the writing of this book, I'm putting myself back through the process again. This process I created for the book in 2020 after having left Sub Rosa. And that was challenging for me because for plus or minus 17 years, a lot of my identity was tangled up in being Michael from Sub Rosa, right? Even though that wasn't the way I saw myself entirely, I think a lot of people did. And so post that, figuring out what I wanted my life to be like, took some time and made this process for it. Now, 5 years later, um, and what's changed and what's stuck and where am I now and what needs to shift and adjust. There are still some core values. There are still some things that I deeply care about, like helping other people work through their challenges, being able to show up as someone who can be present and be, fully immersed in problem solving with someone, but also giving myself the permission to uh, get it wrong sometimes and figure it out as I go. Like, so, I don't think I have a perfect answer for that. I hope by the time I finish writing the book, I do. But I know the outline is clear and I know what the tasks are. So now I'm just in the middle of doing them for myself.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your honesty. And I think that, I can relate, and I think a lot of listeners can relate, because even, within the Life as Ceremony community, something we've been talking about is this in-between space of like who we were versus who we're becoming. And, when we're kind of in that space, it's a unique place to be when someone, asks us a question like that. And what I've been playing around with lately is the idea that we're like a casserole in the oven and we're just cooking, that we're not actually stuck, but we're right in the place that we need to be to bring out all the fullness, all the flavors and all the deliciousness. And we're just
Hmm.
just cooking. And then when you're like through that excruciating process of writing the book, you'll, be stepping into, who you're meant to become or something like
Ex
that.
exactly. Well said.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm curious if we could go back in time a little bit again, because you also are a practitioner of folk medicine, and I'm curious where that journey kind of first started with you and what brought you to that work.
Yeah. So what brought me to that work was changing a water cooler at Sub Rosa. I one day was walking into the office. I was 27 at the time. Wasn't even called Sub Rosa yet. We were still called Seed. And the stress of, being a 27-year-old with a bunch of employees and worrying about their livelihoods and all the stuff we were just talking about was very real. My coping mechanisms for stress were not the most healthy. And so I wasn't taking great care of myself. And so then I was changing the water cooler one day and I just like saw white and then opened my eyes and I was laying on the floor covered in water and I had herniated 3 discs in my back and couldn't walk. And went in to get an MRI and they took a look at everything and they said, you have bone on bone. You have barely any discs left in these vertebrae, and you're going to have arthritic pain the rest of your life if we don't do surgery. You're going to need to do this. Sorry. And so I was like, I'm 27 years old. Is this really the lot I've been dealt? And this was at a time when Eastern medicine and non-traditional forms of medicine were a little less available or at least less talked about. But I was curious enough to try, and so I left and I said, I'm gonna, before we go under the knife, I'm gonna try acupuncture. I'm going to go on the like spiritual buffet line a bit. And acupuncture was helpful, and it led me to a whole Taoist path that I've been on ever since. I practice Qigong every day. I have for many, many years. I am a student of a lot of traditional Chinese medicine practices, though I'm not a practitioner myself. I went down every other lane one could explore, trying to figure out how do we get ourselves better if we're not going to go the Western route. And I have no problem with Western medicine. I think it does a lot of good, but for certain things, there weren't. It wasn't what I needed in this moment. And so what my TCM doctor said to me after about 5 or 6 sessions was, I don't think you have a back problem. He goes, yeah, you don't have discs, but I think you'll be fine without them. And I think you won't have any pain. What you have is a stress problem, and we need to learn how to address that. And if we can address how you manage or don't manage stress right now, I think your back will get better. And so we started doing that. We started working on it with breathing, with Qigong, with Tai Chi, with acupuncture, with herbs. And 6 months later, I had no back pain, and I never had the surgery.
Wow.
And still to this day, if I'm under a lot of stress and I'm not handling it well, that will be the levee that breaks. I've herniated those discs 3 more times since then, but the recovery is always faster, and it's my body's alarm bell. When that goes off, that's when I know, oh, I need to pay attention to that. For some other people, it's digestion. For some other people, it's migraines, right? Like we all should pay attention to what is that chronic thing that pops up that is like, hey, you're not paying attention. Um, and then get back in alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. The body whispers before it screams.
Yeah, but sometimes we like to ignore the whispers.
Totally. Qigong, it's such a big part of your life today and part of your personal practice. Can you share with us the story of how it found you? It felt very, I've heard it before, it's very serendipitous.
It certainly is. So it was around the holiday season many years ago, and I was deciding that I wanted to find a Tai Chi and Qigong master and start to train. And I went to a holiday party a friend of mine was throwing in Brooklyn at the basement of some Italian restaurant. And I walked down the stairs, and there's a crowd of, 40, 50 people down there. And through the crowd, I just see this like weaving little bald head coming toward me. And I can't really even see the person. I just see the top of his head kind of like moving through. And I get to the bottom of the stairs, and this man is standing in front of me, and he sticks his hand out and he says, hello, I'm Master Ru. I teach Tai Chi. Who are you? And I was like, well, I'm your new student, apparently. And so we started talking about how I had been looking for a teacher. And he said, well, let's get to work. And so Master Ru would teach Tai Chi down at South Street Seaport here in New York. Um, he taught it in 0-degree weather and 110-degree weather. And it didn't matter. You were out there at sunrise with him and freezing your ass off or sweating your ass off. It was a way to really put your body through the work it needed. And he was appropriately difficult and hard on me until he realized he didn't have to be. And then he treated me a different way as time went on. And it's interesting, both him and the woman, my teacher who taught me my folk medicine tradition, both of them, well, I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit, but both of them said the same thing in different ways. After a few years of training with them for myself, not to practice on anyone else, I really realized how important these two traditions were to me and how much I had learned from them. And so I asked them if they would teach me how to do this so that I could help other people. And they both looked at me and laughed and said, what do you think we've been doing for 3 years? Like if you can't fix yourself, how on earth would you ever approach helping anyone else
Mhm.
to learn how to fix themselves? So you've got to learn your patient zero. And so that was, it was a good reminder that we have to point the lens inward first before we look out.
Yeah. Yeah. I love just the serendipity of, your connection with Master Ru, because I think that for folks, on a reconnection journey, whether it's with their culture, their ancestry, even with themselves or their own spirituality, I think lots of folks, myself included, are often, looking for that teacher or mentor. And I think part of the process is, if that teacher, that mentor, that path is meant for you, it'll also find you. And all we really need to do is pray about it. And I just the weaving bald head coming straight towards you, and that just how clear that moment. Like, I think creator couldn't have been more clear of like,
Right.
Michael, this is your dude, okay?
It's
Totally.
true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned that you, after Master Ru, you were then connected with another teacher who mentored you or showed you folk medicine tradition. Could you share with us more about that and also how you connected with them?
Yeah. So Doña Leova is a curandera, so a bush medicine shamanic healer from the Nahua people who are Mesoamerican. Doña lives in Mexico, and Doña was in New York visiting, working on people. She comes here once or twice a year historically to work on people here so that she can go back to her village in Mexico, and all the kids have new shoes and the school gets new books, and she really kind of does this work to provide for her village and her community. And she was here visiting, and a friend had sent me a note saying, "Hey, I know you're on this quest and trying all of these interesting things." This was early on when my back was still in a lot of pain. And she said, "This woman is here from Mexico. I saw her a few years ago. You should try to go see her. I bet you'd find it interesting." And I went, and Donia works very physically. Like her divine femininity is balanced by how much yang energy, how much masculine energy she really brings into a session. Because if she was to work very lightly and femininely, there would be an imbalance, right? So the way she thinks about it is, because I am so feminine as a person, I have to work really forcefully. That's how their tradition really sees it. And so remember, I have herniated discs, I'm in a lot of pain, I'm stressed out, all of the stuff. Donia beats the living daylights out of me. I'm screaming and crying. She's spitting on me. She's flipping me over. I'm laying in my belly at one point. She's holding my legs like I'm a wheelbarrow, and she's just kicking my sacrum with her heel. I'm like everything you could possibly imagine that like someone would say, "Don't do that if you have back pain." She's doing it to me. And at the end, I feel lighter. I feel happier. I'm crying with tears of joy, and she hugs me and she says, "Come back tomorrow." And I was like, "I got to do this again tomorrow." And she speaks mostly in Spanish, and at the time my Spanish was worse than it is now. It's still not going to win any awards, but she had a translator in the room. And so I said, "Did she say come back tomorrow?" And he said, "She never has someone come back the next day. Let me figure out what's going on." So they talked really fast. And he came back to me and he said, "Look, in her tradition, a grandmother teaches one granddaughter. They pick a granddaughter because your mom has to be a disciplinarian. Your mom has to be an educator. Your mom has to be a caretaker. Your mom has to do a lot of stuff, but grandma can just be love." And so this tradition gets taught to you by grandma because comes from a place of healing through love. And so he said she has a granddaughter. She has a granddaughter in Mexico, and that child is learning this work. And he goes, and for some reason, she thinks she needs another granddaughter. And if you would like to say yes, tomorrow you will start your training with her. I've never seen her offer this to anyone else. So if this is interesting to you, now is your chance. And so I said, yes, of course. And so I was there the next day learning how to begin to work in this world that Donia has shown me.
Incredible, incredible. And share with us from that moment to where you are now. Yeah, that bridge of now you are working with people one on one and
Mhm.
also facilitating in groups and
Mhm.
sharing, this medicine with other people. What has that
Yeah.
been like?
So a lot of it is about learning how to listen to yourself, to see where your challenges and anxieties and illnesses and injuries are rooted, and then how to work through those to feel free and empowered and alive again. And we do that through touch, we do that through prayer. A big portion of this work that Donia has relayed to me, we work with an egg, a raw egg in the shell. These are called limpias, they're washings, right? So we wash with an egg, we wash with prayer, we wash with the smoke of different plants. Nothing psychedelic in Donia's tradition, but whether we're using sage or rosemary or things like that, or copal, what we're working with is different ways of washing the etheric body, the energetic body, the physical body, so that it can be clear, it can be clean, and it can heal itself. We had this sidebar before this call, but I'll say it here too. I always subscribe to the idea that the best healer you need is yourself, right? And that the practitioner's job is really to create the environment where the innate healing potential in you is realized. And so a lot of this work is creating that container so that you're ready to do the work on yourself that you need.
Hmm. What can people expect from a one-on-one session with you, or how long is it? I mean, and I feel like, after hearing your story of how Danya beat the shit out of you, is
Right.
your offering more gentle, or should
Yes,
people, okay.
yes, for the same reason, right? Because I'm a 6'4" man. If I was to work very yang, very masculinely, that would create a disequilibrium as well, right? So my sessions do tend to be much lighter. They're still, you'll if we're on a point that's tender, it's tender for a reason, right? But I'm not going to work it the way Donia is going to work it. Um, the session, a lot of the work happens in the navel because in the Nawa tradition, we look at the navel as the point of origin. It's where you began when you were inside your mother. It's how you received life, how you received oxygen, how you received food, how you kept yourself alive until you left your mother's womb. And when they cut the cord and you arrive here and you breathe differently and you eat differently, you're in a different womb. You're in a different mother.
Mhm.
And that is sort of how the cosmology of the Nawa sort of see birth and death and rebirth, is sort of this continual rebirthing into larger versions of yourself.
Mhm.
And so when you're laying on your back, we read the navel much similarly to the way, if you've ever had acupuncture or been to a TCM doctor where they do the wrist reading, where they're reading the pulses in the wrist. We kind of do that by reading the pulse in the navel, and different pulses at different levels of pronouncedness, or if it's high or if it's low or if it's absent, if it's left, if it's right, they all mean different things. And so we use that as a diagnostic tool to sort of see how far you've drifted from your original self and what we
Mhm.
need to do to bring you back.
Very cool. Okay. And how long is a one-on-one session?
About 75 to 90 minutes, hour and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I imagine, given what you've explained about the practice and the tradition, this is in person only, non-virtual.
So I do distal stuff as well. I will say nothing beats the in-person experience for either party. But there's plenty of ways of working distally. I think you obviously can't read the pulse that way, but we can sense into it and we can feel it, and through some guided conversation and having you, the recipient, sort of do some work on your side and tell me what you're feeling. We can kind of guide through that way. And I've done that work for years. And also it's interesting because the taking a step into more of a scientific side of things, the law of entanglement, which is that once energy collides, it can never be separated, right? And so the way I think about a distal session is our energy is already commingled. I may not be in the room and be able to feel it with my hand, but I can sense it and I can ask some questions and we can guide ourselves to a better place. And so yeah, so healing work in that direction also works. It's just, as we said before, like you're the healer
Yeah.
and you've got to show up and do your part on the other side of the screen to make that happen.
Hmm. Yeah. Actually, I have a question about that. Like working with folks who want to believe it, like they want to believe that they are their greatest healer. Like they hear you say it, they know it to be true, but a part of them can't quite get there yet. Like a part of
Hmm.
them doesn't embody it yet. Like they believe it, they hear it. It's why they come back. But maybe like what do you notice around that? Like do you notice that people aren't getting better or feeling complete until they really embody that aspect of they are their greatest healer?
Well, that's where the teaching is, right? So why don't you believe it?
Hmm.
Do you not believe it because your parents told you you couldn't? Do you not believe it because you're afraid of who you'll become if you let go of that wound or that story? You know, all of these things are that's the root cause. That's what we want to get at, right? That's the chiron of it, right? And if we can get at understanding the 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 limiter on your own growth, then we can work on removing it.
Hmm. Yeah. I think to embody that belief that we are our own greatest healers is so empowering. And so I, can understand in the world in which we live how we become disconnected and disempowered and rely on external things outside of ourselves that, part of life is kind of reconnecting or coming back to that what I call as truth. Like it's coming back to this truth. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I'll share something very personal. Like about almost 3 years ago now, I was rushed to the ER with severe abdominal pain that it came out of nowhere. And I was at JFK, meant to go to Switzerland for a retreat I was running, and I was like, I can't get on this plane right now. I'm gonna like something is really off, and I went, and it led to about a 7 month in and out of specialists' journey to try to figure out what was going on. And for the first few weeks of that, I, even with someone with a lot of training and a lot of awareness for all of this, kind of forgot that I also could find this answer through my own means and fell into what a lot of people refer to as kind of like white coat syndrome, where it's just sort of like you defer your agency and your sense of knowing to the educated doctor in the white coat in the room. And after a couple of weeks of like the fear response, I noticed I was like, oh, what are you doing? Like you've trained a lot too. You could figure this out. And then I started to do my own work on it and really dig into what might be the root cause of this. And I had a couple Western medicine specialists who I shared some of the background on this. I said, this is why I think it might be happening. And I was basically laughed out of the room. They were like, you're out of your mind. No, this is not that. And then I found this, rather enlightened Western medicine gastroenterologist. And she was like, I hear everything you're saying. She goes, I don't understand that world that much, but it all makes sense. It's not my training, but let's work together to try to figure this out. And within a few months of working on it with her, it was all gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So, don't discount your own intuition as a important player in the process of growth.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that story with us. And it sounds like in that moment as well, using your intuition to find a practitioner or a collaborator with. We can also use our intuition in that way of not being hyper independent, but okay, how can I use my intuition to sense out who could support me with what I'm going through?
Yeah, because ultimately I was still going to need to get CTs, and I was going to have a colonoscopy, and I was going to have these other things that um, were Western medicine required, right, in order to fully diagnose this. But it didn't mean it was going to fix it, right?
Mhm.
And so it was about finding the balance between the two, building your team.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you said team. I always say team. Like even when I work with clients, I'm like, who's on your team? Like you got all
Right.
these seats to fill. Who's on your team? And sometimes seats get vacated and we bring in someone new to the team, but I always call it a team. So I love that you said.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious if there were any answers or diagnoses or anything that, yeah, that you feel comfortable sharing. And also, are you all good now?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I am all good now. Uh, it was presenting as early signs of colon cancer. And that is the number one cause of cancer, number one type of cancer for men under the age of 50 right now. And so that said, I had a lot of inflammation and pain, and so they couldn't do a colonoscopy to determine or rule it out because it would risk perforating my bowel, which could then lead to being on a colostomy bag. So they said, we're going to wait until we get you a little more uninflamed, and the inflammation wasn't going down. And that was because there was a lot of stress and anxiety around that. Now, in TCM, every organ has an associated emotion. The emotion of the large intestine is grief. And I was grieving a lot at that time. I was grieving the loss of my dog who had passed. I was grieving the loss of Sub Rosa, which was no longer in my life. And those were big things that I lost. And that grief didn't have a logical place to leave the body. And so it got stuck somewhere. And so when I addressed the grief, and this was the thing I was talking about with the gastroenterologist, and I said, like, look, I get we're going to have to do a colonoscopy again. I get we're going to have to do all this other stuff. But I think what I actually really need to do is work on grief and releasing grief before we get there. And she was like, okay, you do you. I'm here when you're ready, and blah, blah, blah. And I did some work on that. And when I was ready, the time was right. And no colon cancer.
Amazing. Okay, great. Thank you for the
Yeah.
story and update, and we're so happy that you're doing well today.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, how do you balance, the corporate world with, I guess, folk medicine or this side of
Mm-hmm.
you? And I'm curious if you ever deal with like self-doubt or imposter syndrome of having to, in a way, occupy space in both of these worlds. Yeah.
I used to. I don't anymore. I don't anymore because I'm okay being the full version of myself. Uh, but that took time for that confidence to be right sized. I had a teacher named Gil Barreto, who's a spiritual teacher of mine for many years. And I talked to him about the schizophrenia of having this alternative medicine life and this corporate life. I was like, Gil, on one hand, I feel this way, and on another hand, I feel that way. I don't want to talk about the one to the other. It feels odd. And he said, first of all, you're already doing the same work in two different places. You're just using different language and different tools. So if you were to get in a helicopter, imaginary helicopter, and go up high enough above the alternative medicine bundle of things in your life and the corporate bundle of things in your life, and you go up high enough that those two dots look like one bundle, ask yourself, what's the one thing that I'm looking down on? And then go back to both of them and just do it like that. And the one thing that, when I did that exercise and thought about it, was empathy. It
Mm,
was about how do we suspend our own bias, understand ourselves and others more fully, get to root causes, get to origins, and use that understanding for growth. And so, that's how applied empathy was born. That's basically how that book got written, was understanding both of those worlds are the same world if
mhm.
we go up high enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, humans were so multifaceted. And I think what you just shared with us is such a valuable tool that, okay, you're multifaceted and you're living these different lives that all feel true to who you are. Zoom out, zoom up, and what's the dot that connects all of it?
Right.
Really beautiful. Okay. My last couple questions for you.
Go ahead.
What's something that you are currently learning or unlearning?
Mm. Uh, I'm currently learning how to choose these words very wisely. Forgive parts of myself for things that needed to happen, but maybe didn't need to happen the way they happened. And so, without getting into too much of it, because it is a complicated and long story and quite personal, I will say think you get into a point at some point in your life where things feel like they're heading in one direction and then they take a turn. And in that turn, you white knuckle kind of grab onto the story, and softening that grip is sometimes harder than you'd imagine. But once you let go, you can start to see this was the turn it needed to take in order to get the growth you needed to get.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Even, without the details, when you share the essence, especially through metaphor, I think so many of us can connect with it because even though our stories might be different, that essence,
Hmm.
a lot of us can relate to. Yeah. What does ceremony mean to you, or what does life as a ceremony mean to you?
Yeah. For me, I think about intentionality. And I think that when we are intentional, we are creating ceremony in anything we do, whether it's making the coffee in the morning or tea, depending on the day, or it's how you take your walk with your dog, right? Like it doesn't have to be top of the mountaintop level things to be ceremonial, and doing things with intention. The way you're fully present when you have a conversation with someone, the all of these things can be ceremony, and lead to a richer and fuller life when intentionality is at the front.
Mhm. Beautifully said. And yeah, I think, my perspective on ceremony aligns very much with yours, especially the dog walking and the coffee making.
Mhm, yeah.
And I hope that next time you have a Slurpee and you are so intentional and present with your Slurpee, you think of me and it can be your Slurpee ceremony. And then my last question is, how can listeners find you, work with you, or support you?
So on the social end of things, LinkedIn and Instagram are my two most logical places. Very findable on both. And Michael Ventura on Instagram, and my LinkedIn is easy to find if you look me up there as well. I describe the difference is that I'm weirdly professional on LinkedIn and professionally weird on Instagram. Both are true. And you could always go to consolidatedeggs.com, which is the URL that I put all my eggs in one basket and describe everything I'm working on there. And that kind of just gets updated in real time as life changes.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, for joining me today, for sharing your wisdom, your stories, your realness, and vulnerability. This was such a pleasure. Thank you so
Oh,
much, Michael.
thanks, Sam. I appreciate it.